If you're looking to become a master of tuning your guitar by ear, then this video is for you. If you're looking for any practical tips regarding tuning your acoustic or electric guitar, this video is also for you. Thank you for watching. Stay with me, guys. I've got a lot to share with you in this video. My name is Chris and I've been playing guitar for 19 years of my life, believe it or not. I've got two beautiful guitars here. One of them is brand new, one of them is really old, older than me. Let's talk about it right now. Let's tune them and see. Some of the techniques I will show here, you'll be able to transfer them to other similar instruments, although probably not the piano, because when you're tuning a piano temperament, that's a lot more complicated. What's good about the guitar is that we have these things called frets. The frets make it so when we tune one string, the fretted notes are also supposed to be in tune relative to a tuning system called equal temperament. You can research it if you want, but it's not that important. It just means that there's an equal distance between each semitone. So the first thing is you need to tune your guitar using some sort of an electronic tuning device. You can use a tuner on your phone. You can use a headstock tuner, which is what I tend to prefer because they're just more practical. Or you can use an actual tuner or maybe a pedal tuner, guitar pedal tuner. That's another thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this headstock tuner and I'm going to place it on the headstock of my guitar and clip it on like this. And then I will turn it on. And then I will play one string. And then the tuner here is supposed to tell me if my string is sharp or flat. Now you have to know what notes you're going to tune to start with. Just in case you don't know, the small string or the top string, this is called the first string or the high E string. That's supposed to be tuned to the note E in standard guitar tuning. So this is what standard guitar tuning sounds like. Okay, now people who've been playing guitar for years, they have like a memory imprint of that sound. So I've seen some guys that I play with, that they can just tune their guitar by ear just to kind of that chord. So for example, their G might be flat or something, or the D might be sharp. And then they can hear that and then they can adjust it by ear to fix it just because they're so used to the sound of standard tuning. So the electronic tuner is a great device for helping you hear the note, but also the tuner is there to tell you if the note is sharp or flat, if the tuning is correct or not. Electronic tuners are really useful when you're out on a gig or when you're out on the field and you don't want to rely on your ear totally to tune every string. Although there is a problem with electronic tuners, especially when you're practicing, because sometimes you might be listening to a certain recording that's sharp by a certain amount relative to standard tuning, or flat, and you may want to tune your guitar to that tuning so that you can play along with the recording and practice and obviously learn the music you're trying to learn and transcribe. So how would you get around doing that? Well, what I would say the best solution is you have to tune your guitar to the recording. So you can start with one string on your guitar and basically tune it to what is known as a reference pitch. So what you would do is you'd pick any string on your guitar. I tend to pick the first string, sometimes the low E string, depends, but I like to tune the first string just because once you have the first string in tune, it's pretty easy to tune the other strings using some of the methods I'm going to show you here by ear. So you tune your first string, play some notes on your first string, and listen to the recording that you're trying to transcribe, and you should be able to hear if you're in tune with it or not. Especially if it's a guitar recording. You can start with your high E string and listen to it and then adjust it accordingly to be either sharp or flat or whatever tuning it's in. Okay, so now once you've tuned your high E string or any other string to your reference note, there's a few more things that we need to discuss here that are very important for tuning your guitar by ear. One of them is your guitar needs to be set up properly. If it's not set up properly by a professional, you're going to encounter all sorts of issues when trying to tune your guitar by ear. Let me explain exactly why some of those things occur. So let me grab this other guitar over here. If the guitar has worn out frets, or if the nut is not cut properly, it is going to cause all kinds of problems for trying to tune the guitar. You will not be able to tune the guitar using the methods that I'm showing you if your guitar has not received a proper setup by a professional. Now, let's talk about reasons why that occurs. So look at this guitar. This is a very old guitar. It's older than me, okay? And if you look and zoom in on the fretboard, you'll see a few things. You'll see on the second fret, there's actually some grooves inside the frets, but that's not an issue. That's kind of like scalloping your fretboard like Yngwie Malmsteen or something. But if you look at the actual fret, you can see that there's kind of grooves in the frets. That's from years and years of playing and the frets have never ever been changed. So what these grooves essentially do is they change the intonation of the note when you press on the fret. So depending on the height of the fret, when you press the string down on that fret, you will get a certain pitch. But if the fret height is not where it's supposed to be, then the pitch you get when you press down it's going to be different. It'll be impossible to tune using fretted notes simply because your frets are worn out. The other thing is if your nut is not cut properly, for example, if the strings are not sitting inside the slots of the nut, this is very common for left-handed players like me. What we often do sometimes when we're trying guitars is we have to flip the strings on the guitar upside down, and what results of that is some of the strings are not sitting in the nut slot correctly, so you essentially cannot really use the second or first fret notes to tune your guitar because the intonation is not going to be the same as if the strings were sitting correctly in the nut slot. So that's why it's very important that you get a proper setup done on your guitar before you do this. Now, obviously, if your guitar is not properly set up, you can still find ways to compensate the tuning. You may have to use the higher frets, and I'll show some methods of doing that later. I like to use octaves. That's a reliable method, but there's three main methods I'm going to show. The 5th fret method, the octave method, as well as harmonics. We'll talk about each one, and we'll get into it. So this guitar really needs a setup, so I'm not going to use this guitar to demonstrate this because we're going to run into all sorts of issues, but you can tinker with it yourself and you'll kind of understand what I mean. So now when I say your guitar needs a setup by a professional, what I really mean is a well-known luthier. I would try to avoid big name music stores with repair departments unless you know that they already do good work and that they have good reviews, then fine. But otherwise, I would tend to gravitate towards a well-known guitar repair shop in your city, in your town. Or what I would say is ask a guitar player that you look up to and ask them where they get their repair work done, and then use that as some sort of a reference. So I have a luthier that I work with in my town. I've been going to them for a very long time and I trust them very much. They do good work. And I just got this guitar back from the shop because this is actually a new axe, and I had him cut the new nut or fix the nut to be left-handed, as well as work a bit on the saddle. So once you have your proper setup done to the guitar, it's going to be a lot easier to tune it by ear. And I know this for a fact because I was jamming with this guitar yesterday and it was like a breeze to tune it. Now let's talk about some practical things in regards to tuning. There's a tendency that players tend to have when we're playing guitar on our lap like this. Sometimes we lean the guitar like this, kind of away from you, just so you can kind of see where you're placing your fingers. This is a common tendency, but when you're tuning, it's very important that you keep the guitar flush to your body, because you can try it for yourself, but when you play a note and the guitar is flush to your body, it's not going to be the same as when you tilt it up. It might be a bit sharper when you tilt it up. So definitely keep it flush to your body as much as possible when tuning to get the most reliable pitch out of the note. And we're talking strictly about tuning by ear here, so we do not need this electronic tuner anymore. Once we've tuned our reference pitch, you may have tuned it by ear, or you may have tuned it using the electronic tuner. Fun fact, I like to tune a little bit sharp. This is a TC Electronic Unitune tuner. I think it's a good tuner, although I'm not sponsored or affiliated with these people at all. I just think it's a good tuner. I like it because you can tune a little bit sharp or a little bit flat. So I tend to set the hertz setting a little bit sharper than normal. So like 441 or 444. So like I'll play my high E string and then you can see we're kind of right around the pitch, maybe a little flat. Okay. So I already told you, you got to keep your guitar straight. The other thing is, if you're practicing this at home and working on your ear and learning how to tune your guitar, I would say try to do it in a relatively controlled environment and try to avoid sitting right underneath a fan, because when you have a fan going right on top of you, it kind of creates a wavering effect with the guitar strings in your ears, which is cool because it sounds like a tremolo, but it's not cool when you're tuning because you're not going to be able to tell if the note is sharp or flat, although it's just going to be harder to tell. Now let's talk about the technique used when tuning a guitar. So once we have one string tuned, how we tune the other strings is by comparing the pitch of the other strings to the string that we know is in tune. In order to do that, we need to play two strings at once. So some of you might ask, okay, how do you do that? So somebody who's a beginner, they may not necessarily understand how to play two strings at once. So you could use two separate fingers. You could use your index finger and your middle finger, or you could use your thumb if you're more comfortable, and your index finger. If you're using a pick, you could pick the low string and then finger pick the other string. Let's say I'm comparing my high E string against my B string, I would pick the B string and then I would finger pick the B string, either with my middle finger or my index finger, kind of like this. So I play them at the same time. So you need to learn how to do that with whatever two strings you're tuning at the same time. The G and the E, that's out of tune. Sometimes you might do the D and the E. Sometimes you might do the A and the E, or both E's. So you have to learn how to play two notes at once in order to tune your guitar. So just assume that when I'm playing two notes at once, I'm most probably just using my index and my middle, or my thumb and my middle finger. So the next thing to know is that every guitar is a little bit different and unique. So each guitar has its own resonant frequencies that may make certain notes easier or harder to tune. So with all the information I'm about to tell you, you may need to make slight adjustments to determine what your preferences are when tuning that particular guitar. For example, I noticed with this guitar, the B note, depending on the exact frequency, sometimes it creates a vibration in the guitar that makes it a little bit more difficult to tune a B octave, for example, like that. Okay, so now let's talk about how to tune the guitar by ear. There's a few different methods that we can use. So let's assume our first string is in tune. There's the 5th fret method, which is very common. It's probably the most well-known method. The 5th fret method involves comparing the high string, open string, against the 5th fret on the string lower than it. So in this case, I'm fretting the 5th fret on the 2nd string, or the B string, and I will compare that to the open high E string. Okay? And listen to hear if those are in tune or not. Now, you would do it as follows. So you would compare these, then you would move over to the 4th fret and compare the B string to the G string, etc. And then you'd move back to the 5th fret there. Now, I'm just showing you what the method entails before I start doing the actual tuning, because the actual tuning involves a technique to it too. Just stay with me here, folks. If you guys are enjoying this, if you guys are getting value out of this, you can also support this content by sending me a donation, actually by using this QR code right here, or by clicking on the first link in the description. I appreciate that a lot. Now, the 5th fret method is very good, and I tend to use this method in combination with two other methods. One of them is the octave method. So one example of an octave would be comparing the open B string, or the open 2nd string, to the high E string, 7th fret, which is also the note B. And I would compare that octave and listen. Some other examples, I'll show them in a sec here once I start beginning to tune the guitar. And then the third technique that I would use for tuning would be harmonics. But the only harmonics that you can reliably use to tune a guitar are on the 12th fret and on the 5th fret. You cannot use the 7th fret, 9th fret, or 4th fret, or any of the other natural harmonics, simply because those harmonics do not present notes that are in tune with the fretted notes on your guitar. And we don't have to go into exactly why that is right now, but it relates to where the frets are placed on the guitar to achieve the equal temperament tuning system. Okay, so let's start tuning, and let's do it one string at a time. So what I'll do is I'll just start detuning my guitar a little bit. Just so it's completely out of tune, but it's not that far. It's just slightly out of tune. Now I tune the first string. So that one we know is in tune. Let's tune the 2nd string to the 1st string. So I'll listen to it. So I know it's supposed to be a B. So it's supposed to sound something like that. Now let's say it's close to that, but you're not sure if it's in tune or not. How do you check? You can use the 5th fret method. So that would compare the 5th fret on the B string against the open high E string. And that actually sounds okay. Now let's compare the open B string to the high E string 7th fret. And you can hear how that it sounds acceptable, but you notice there was a bit of resonance there. I don't know if you heard it in the recording. That made it a little bit hard to determine if it was on pitch or not. So when you play the two notes together, make sure to play them with a consistent technique. You don't have to play them super loud, but play them at a volume that you're going to be playing at when you're out on the field. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be doing this, what I'm showing you here, when you're out on the field about to jam, listening to your friend's guitar, and he's playing and you're tuning to his guitar and you're listening to how both guitars sound together, because you're using his guitar as a reference to tune, so you guys can play in tune with one another. Keep that in mind when when I'm showing you all this stuff here. When you're doing it in a closed office environment like I have here, this is just for practice purposes, but when it really comes down to it, we're gonna be out there on the field tuning the guitar, okay? So it does sound a little flat to me. So what we're gonna do in this case is we're gonna assume that it's okay, but we're gonna probably come back to it at some point, because for every string you tune, you also need to reference that string against every other string to make sure the whole guitar is in tune. And I know that sounds daunting, but don't worry, stay with me and we'll get to it, okay? Let's tune the G next. So I'll tune it using the 5th fret method first. So I'll tune the G to the B using the 4th fret. I'm going to fret the 4th fret on the G string and compare it to the open B string, 2nd string. So the G string is definitely flat here, meaning it's too low. So I'm going to raise it up on the tuner. And now it sounds better. Now what I'll do is I'll compare that G note to the 3rd fret on the high E string. So open G string that we just tuned. Compare it to the 3rd fret on the high E string. That's an octave right there. So I'm combining octaves with the 5th fret method to basically check if the G string that I tuned using the 5th fret method is good against my high E string. So it sounds okay. But the octave, again, when we're tuning these intervals, they always have to sound pure, meaning there's no wavering between the two notes. Like for example, that sounds bad because it's out of tune. When we're tuning the guitar, we're always going to be using octaves or unisons. A unison is the 5th fret method, and an octave is the octave method. So for example, open G against the 3rd fret on the high E, and open G against potentially the 8th fret on the B string. That's another one you can check. Okay, but let's keep tuning the guitar using the 5th fret method just to get it close to pitch, because we need to make sure all our strings are pretty much right around the desired pitch before we can begin doing more fine-tuning methods using octaves and the 5th fret method and harmonics potentially. So let's tune the D. So it was a little sharp. And sometimes if you're not sure if a note is really sharp or flat, or if you think that the note is really far from the note it's supposed to be, then definitely either use the electronic tuner if you're not confident to do that. Or another way of doing it is bring the note very out of tune and then bring it up to where it's supposed to be, because when a note is more out of tune, it's easier to find the right note, so to speak. So that's kind of what I did there. So I'm just bringing it reasonably around where it's supposed to be. Now I'm going to check it against my high E string, because I know that one's in tune because I started with that one. First I'll use the 5th fret method to check it against the G string. Now the reason why I don't like the 5th fret method that much is because it creates compounded errors. So for example, if you tune the B string and the G string using the 5th fret method, it's possible that your tuning wasn't 100% precise. So for each string that you tune, let's say you tuned it a little bit flat, you're using that flat note to tune another string, so it creates compounded errors for every string. That's why you need to check it against every other string too. So I'll check the 5th fret to start. Sounds okay. But now what I'll do is I'll try an octave. So I'll do 2nd fret on the D string that we're currently tuning, and I will check that against the open E string. And that sounds a little bit acceptable, but it could use some work. Let's tune the A and the E, and then we'll do some fine tuning. So this is the open A string. I'm checking it against the 2nd fret on the G string. So I'm fretting that note on the G string, and I'm playing my open A string, the 5th string. Now here's an interesting technique that you can mess around with. I tend to do this a lot when I'm tuning quickly and stuff. If you're not 100% sure if a note is sharp or flat, what you could do is bend the fretted note like this. In this case, I'm slightly bending it sharp, and you can see that when I bend that A note sharp, I can control if the octave is in tune or not. Now ideally what you want is not to bend the string and the note have to be in tune, but if you have to bend the string a bit to make it be in tune, it means that one of the notes in the octave is out of tune. And I know this is a bit of an advanced method, and it's also a little bit unorthodox. You probably won't see many classical guitarists doing this, but I think that it is a method that you could try, and also it could be used to improve your ear. Because when I play the low A string, and match it against the second fret of the G, it sounds okay, but if you listen carefully, there's a bit of wavering there. It doesn't sound like a very good octave. So what I'll often do, if I'm not sure how accurate it is, I'll often bend the fretted note a bit to see what it does. So when I bend it, it gets more in tune. What it means is that the octave, the interval of the octave from the low A to the high A, is slightly too narrow, and I need to widen it a little bit, in this case by lowering the A string that I'm tuning. So imagine this. This is the octave, the distance between one note and another. If I bend the higher note, it sounds more in tune. It means that the octave's too narrow and I need to widen it. But because this string is already in tune, I need to lower this string to widen the octave instead. At least that's how I would visually imagine it. So I'm going to lower the A string a bit. And if you quickly need to lower a string, because I believe tuning up is easier than tuning down. So what I'll often do, if a string is too sharp, I'll tend to bring it too flat, like I'll just lower it completely. Now I know it's flat, and then I can compare it again. And then I can start bringing it up to where it needs to be, comparing it against my note. Still flat. So now it's a little better, just a bit sharp actually. But now it's right around where it needs to be. Okay, it's actually just a bit sharp. So it's reasonable. Okay, and now we'll do the low E. Now the low E is a little easier depending on the tuning you're doing. If you're doing standard tuning, you could compare it just against your high E string. And if it's close enough to pitch, you should be able to kind of bring it close to where it's supposed to be. You see? But because it's a double octave, it's kind of impossible to fine-tune it using that specific interval. So I'll show you another interval to really fine-tune it. I'll show you a few more intervals. So now that our guitar is reasonably around the pitch, we can begin playing a few chords on the guitar to see how they sound. Because at the end of the day, you want it to be in tune for whatever music or chords that you are playing. So the guitar on its own is actually not as in tune as you think it is because it uses equal temperament. All the chords are actually slightly out of tune to begin with, which is something that your ear is probably already used to this. But what you really need to be concerned with is that the octave notes, so like the low G here on the third fret of the low E string, compare it to the open G string. That should sound very pure and perfect. It should not have any wavering and undesired out of tuneness. It should not be out of tune. That's what I'm trying to say. So when you play your G chord, you can also check the fifths. So that fifth sounds okay, but it's not that good. What I'm going to do now is just show you a whole bunch of octave intervals that you can use for tuning your guitar, and then what you're going to do is try each one of them, and then for your specific guitar you're going to determine which ones are best to use, because sometimes you're going to use 7th fret versus an open string. Other times you might use a 12th fret harmonic against a fretted note. These are some of the octaves that I would use. So I already showed you a couple of them. So open B string against the 7th fret E string. That's one. The other one would be open G string against the 8th fret of the B string to tune the G note. It's an octave. The next one would be the open D string against the 7th fret on the G string. Okay. And obviously when you're tuning, you want to keep your finger straight and not bend the string. But if you do bend the string, you should hear what it does to the string. So in this case, if I have to bend the string to make the octave in tune, it means that again my octave is too narrow, meaning my D string is either too sharp or my G string is too flat and it needs to be raised up a bit. So it sounds okay there. So I think the D string is a little bit sharp. And then, so I showed you the open D against the 7th fret on the G like this. One that's very similar is the 12th fret harmonic on the D string against the 7th fretted note on the G string, like this. And again, it sounds like my D string is a little sharp because the octave is too narrow. There we go. That's quite a lot better. And now I'll do the same thing. I'll do open A string against the 7th fret on the D string. Now also check the 12th fret harmonic on the A string against the 7th fret on the D string. And that should sound good. Okay. And then finally you can check your open E string against the 7th fret on the A string. And you hear that? Sounds out of tune. When I bend the string a bit, I'll also check this against the harmonic. So I'll check the 12th fret harmonic on the low E string against the 7th fret on the A string. That might actually be a little bit easier for you to hear. I just want to talk a little bit about the actual technique involving tuning the peg. So a quick thing I would say is tuning up to a note it tends to be easier than tuning down to a note, especially if you're on a nylon string guitar. So let's say I tune my G string. Let's say my G string is sharp, right, like this. It's sharp. I may not try to tune the peg down to bring the G down. What I'll tend to do, what I think is more reliable, is you bring the note flat, and then once you know that it's flat, you slightly start to tighten the string to raise it back up. That's okay. So we're using octaves to tune, and the examples I showed earlier were when the octave was too narrow, we needed to widen it by lowering one of the notes. But also the octave can be too wide. For example, if my G string is flat like it just was, the G string is now too low. So when I compare it against the 8th fret on the B string to get that G octave, if I slightly bend the fretted note like I'm showing you, you hear how it goes even more out of tune. So that's something you can pay attention to. If when you bend your fretted note, it brings the octave in tune, it means that the octave is too narrow and you need to lower lower the bottom note or raise the higher note. However, if you bend the fretted note and the octave goes more out of tune, then it means that the octave is already too wide, meaning that you need to raise up the lower note in the octave or lower the higher note in the octave. So in this case, I'm going to raise up the lower note in the octave. I'm going to raise the open G string. And I'm just raising it slightly. And you can hear it when I pick them. I don't pick them at the same time. I pick the G string first, and then I pick the other string to hear them. But if I pick them at the same time, you could do that too. You have to do both, really. Whatever you hear better. So still a little too flat. So that's pretty much right around where it should be. So a few more checks you can do. This is the 2nd fret method that you can use to check if your tuning is good. So open G against the 3rd fret E string. Next is open D string against the 3rd fret B string. That's a good one to check if you do drop D tuning. The next one would be open A string against the second fret on the G string. Check your A note. Okay. Then the next one would be obviously your open E string against your second fret of your D string. Just the low E string was a little flat, it seems. That's a bit better. A few more are second fret on the D string against the open E string. Also second fret on the A string against the open B string. Okay, and then third fret on the low E string against your open G string. So here, listen to this one, right? Sounds a bit off. When I slightly bend this note, you hear how it brings it more in tune? It means that the low E string is a bit flat and we need to raise it up. That's better. You may not get it perfect, but it doesn't matter, because what really matters is if it sounds good. So whatever you're playing, if you're doing a lot more lead guitar, you want to listen to how your leads are sounding against your rhythm player's chords. So if your rhythm player is going like this, if he's doing that, and then you're playing you can start by playing one note. Let's say you're the lead player in the band. You should be able to hear if that string is out of tune. If it's out of tune, then bring it to pitch so that it sounds good with the chords that he's playing. And then once you know that that string is reasonably around where it should be, you can use that string as your reference string to tune the other strings. Okay, so any string can be used as the reference string, and you can use all the methods I showed in the video to tune each string, and then check the strings you're tuning against the ones that are already in tune, and then just practice it and get better at it, and eventually you should be able to tune your guitar pretty fast, you know, in a minute or less, in 30 seconds. So best of luck with that. Let me know if this video helped. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.